get into War Master box sets with Big Finish the same way that you get into horror films. You don't do it necessarily to have a good time, but you know that sometimes you will have a very good time. But you do it because it's going to be really morbid, depressing, and you want to know quite how depraved the Doctor Who universe is going to get. And that's what you get with several War Master sets. My introduction to the range was last year with the Killing Time box set, which honestly, what the War Master, played here by Derek Jacobi, who's reprising his role from Utopia back in Series 3, he only had like 10 minutes of screen time, if that, as the War Master. But this is like his 8th box set now? How many box sets have we had with the Yeah, this is his 8th one, with another 3 on the way in the coming years. But the War Master, played by Derek Jacobi, is, I think, hands down the most depraved and barbaric incarnation of the Master that at least I've ever checked out. He is incredibly morbid. He likes to enact suffering and torment and torture onto anyone that he sees fit, but he's also in the middle of the Time War, which is where Escape from Reality, this new box set, starts off, where he is interrogating a Dalek, he is trying to break it down for scrap, and it turns out that this Dalek has a homing beacon inside of it. So he decides, in order to get away from this logical race, we need to go to a place where their whole ideology does not make sense, a place they cannot comprehend. He goes to the land of fiction, which seems like something akin to the second Doctor's The Mind Robber. And in the land of fiction, we've got a quartet of stories. We've got The Wrath of Medusa by Roshanna Patel, which takes him in Greek mythology. The Shadow Master by Lily Hopley, which is an adaptation of The Shadow by Hans Christian Andersen. We've got The Adventures of the Deceased Doctor by Alfie Shaw, which is Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And we've got The Master of Dorian Gray by David Llewellyn, which is, of course, you can probably imagine the legend, the portrait of Dorian Gray. So we've got a quartet of stories here, and we're going to go through them in chronological order. Let's talk about The Wrath of Medusa first. So the Master, at the beginning of the story, they get the premise out of the way really, really quickly. He is tracked down by a squadron of Daleks. He decides, okay, time to initiate Plan Z. I'm going to go to the land of fiction in order to escape the Daleks, and also try and find some sort of weapon in order to use against the Daleks, and maybe even against the Time Lords in this Time War. If you're in the land of fiction, then basically anything goes, and the weapon that he's after is the head of Medusa, because in the story, in Greek mythology, Perseus, who is the half-human son of Zeus, who lives at the top of Mount Olympus, of course, he chops the head off Medusa and uses it to defeat the Kraken. The only way that this story could get any more authentic to Greek mythology is if the Master at one point shouted, "Release the Kraken!" But he does find Perseus praying to the gods or anyone who will listen on a beach, and all of a sudden the Master appears to hear his call. Let's play a clip from The Wrath of Medusa.
Help me in my hour of need! Are the gods deaf to my pleas?
Oh, just look at you.
Eh?
Raging at an empty sky. Normally, I'd think you were wasting your breath, but here I'm not so sure.
He does what all mortals do when faced by a challenge greater than themselves. He appeals to the gods for help.
Yes, but in my experience, such cries are rarely answered. Least of all by the gods of ancient Greece. You are Athena, goddess of war.
I am.
Oh, Pallas Athena, I kneel before you. I pleaded for aid from both you and Hermes.
Yes.
But can this be? Hades?
Me? Hades? God of the dead? King of the underworld? Yes.
No. I do not know who this mortal is, or where he has come from.
Well, that would be a long story. Suffice it to say, I'm from far beyond this world.
You are no ordinary mortal.
No. I've always had a rather special relationship with death. I've tried it. It didn't suit me. So, no, I am no ordinary mortal. I am the Master.
So for those of you who know your Greek mythology, Perseus is after a weapon from Athena and also from Zeus and from Hades and others as well, in order to try and find a way to defeat Medusa. Because if you look at Medusa, who is a Gorgon, you'll get turned to stone. The Master is basically, in this story, trying to pull the biggest power gambit possible, where he wants to try and overthrow the gods of Olympus and also try and rewrite the story that he's in of Greek mythology. At first pretending to be Hades, but, the gods are a bit... They know each other, the gods all know each other. They know that this isn't Hades, but the War Master is trying really, really hard to meet the part and meet the expectations placed upon him there. It was a really good set. Greg Austin, who you may remember from the best Doctor Who spin-off, Class, plays Perseus, does a really good job. You've got Athena as well, who is a really nuanced and interesting character, played by Sakuntala Ramani, who is obviously very interested and intrigued by the Master, but is also very intrigued by his travelling cabinet. Like, how did he get here? How did he get to this realm of fiction? How did he get to Greek mythology? And can we and the gods harness this technology as well? But of course, as is normal with these War Master box sets, he is several steps ahead of all of them. And the climax of the story as well, and the directions it goes in, particularly when he encounters Zeus as well at the top of Mount Olympus, is something else. I can't really talk too much spoiler-wise about several of these stories, because obviously the directions it goes in each story, the direction that they go in the third act, is the baseline appeal of these War Master box sets as well. Like, okay, what is this building to? When does the Master show his hand? But this is still a really, really good version of it. And because this is Greek mythology as well, you're not dealing with your average alien or human type threat. You are dealing with these mythical creatures, which are very much real and tangible in this story. Like, Hermes does have his boots as well, which grant flight and super speed. Medusa is looked after by a group of overseers who do what they're called. They predict the future, but they share the same eye, and the Master has to try and negotiate with them with a Dalek eye stalk that he salvaged. It's just a really cool twist on the mythology and on the material that goes into really fun and unexpected directions. The Fates, thank you chat, you folks know more about Greek mythology than me. Yeah, you've got the Fates, and one of them is played by Sophia Ingar, who you may recognise from the 11th Doctor Geronimo set, playing Valerie Lockwood, the 11th Doctor's new companion. They're really good across numerous stories. They also play a hobgoblin in the second story in the set as well. It's really, really good. But what I like about this box set, broadly speaking, though, is that it doesn't just rest on its laurels in terms of, okay, here's the same formula, here's what we're going to be doing across the 4 stories, which I felt like the last War Doctor box set, which was Self-Defense, where he meets the 10th Doctor in the final installment, was kind of getting into a bit of a rut. It was just following the same formula over the first 3 stories, and then it really got interesting in the last one, but it was a little bit too little too late. Escape from Reality does not rest on its laurels, and when you get to The Shadow Master by Lizzie Hopley, which is an adaptation of The Shadow by Hans Christian Andersen, which is about a shadow that detaches from its host and comes to life. And this is the land of fiction, so this is the Master's Shadow. And what does the Master's Shadow do? But what I found interesting about The Shadow Master by Lizzie Hopley is that it's a very different format from The Wrath of Medusa, and to a lesser extent the other 2 as well, The Adventure of the Deceased Doctor and The Master of Dorian Gray. It's got a narrator, and it's a narrator that's not the Master. The narrator is the Shadow itself, given voice, and a lovely voice, Gethin Anthony's voice as well, who plays the Shadow Master of the story. Let's play a clip from The Shadow Master, and you can understand the narration and the point that I'm making.
It was in the wood that it happened. A deep, dark wood. The kind you only find in stories. A wood where wolves turn into men and breadcrumbs lead to terrible doors. My master went there to think, burning the last of his dreadful experiments on a bonfire, the dark light of which drove the watchful horde back into the shadows. I could feel his moods change through his skin. We were so close. I had no such barrier to my form. I had no form. His humours rinsed through me like a rising tide, and in the deep darkness of the wood I rose, greater, larger, darker, behind my master as he stood, and broke free.
Who's there? Show yourself. Beware, beware, watchful face. The prey that hides invites the chase.
How could I answer? Without a tongue? Without a voice? The questions I had, thoughts burned in me. I was so close to him, had I breath, he should have felt it graze his cheek. Had I eyes, he'd have seen his own reflected mere inches away. Master and shadow, face to face.
Yeah, that's one thing that I guess really loved about the Shadow Master, where it messes around with the format that we've previously come to expect from these War Master box sets, where the War Master is actually a supporting player, and in fact he's not present for most of the story. This is a story about the Shadow Master, about what does this creature do now that it has gained sentience. I'm not familiar with the source material, the fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, who also did The Little Mermaid. There is a Little Mermaid reference though, specifically to Ursula. I don't know if their name is Ursula in the original fairy tale, but the creature that stole the Little Mermaid's voice in exchange for being able to walk on land. There's a lot of references to different source material here, but that's because the War Master is in the land of fiction. He's able to interact with these different fairy tale creatures, and also the fact that he knows that these are fictional characters, he knows where the story goes, and whether or not he lets his antagonists in this story, or the protagonists conventionally, know that he knows that, or even know the story, the ending of the story themselves, is always like a question that you need to address in these four stories, and the way that all four of them handle it is so deftly done. In the Shadow Master, voiced by Gethin Anthony, does become aware of the ending of the fairy tale, and that the Master is trying to lure him into that trap. But of course, the War Master knows that he knows, and then it's the whole mind games aspect. And the narration, the fact that we're able to get into the Shadow Master's head and get his thought process. And it is just a really nice story as well. You've got Jesse Romeo, who plays poetry, the embodiment of poetry in this fictional universe, and the Shadow Master and poetry fall in love with each other. And it is a bit arch, it is a bit fairy tale simplistic, but I absolutely believed it. I think Jesse Romeo is doing some of the best voice work of the entire year for Big Finish, carrying these stories and really making the love story, that the beating heart of the Shadow Master story, really feel tangible and alive. And of course, there's the Devil, played by Sam Stafford, who gets a scene here. The mythical story of the Devil handing somebody a gun, but the first 3 bullets will answer to you, but the 4th one answers to me alone. And the power play that the Master does with those bullets is superb, and I adored it. It's so fun and so dark, and I love the direction that the Shadow Master goes in, and how it does play with that formula. But we need to get to the Trait de Resistance, the adventure of the deceased Doctor, which is written by Alfie Shaw, which partially crosses over with the Big Finish Sherlock Holmes stories, where Nicholas Briggs plays Sherlock Holmes. We also have the returning Big Finish voice actor for the Sherlock Holmes range, Richard Earle, playing Dr. John Watson, and they're also joined by Lestrade, or Lestrade as he's called in this box set, played by Owen from Torchwood, Burn Gorman, and it's a really, really good role. So the pitch for this is that the War Master is Sherlock Holmes. He lives at 221B Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson is the housekeeper, and they solve crimes together. Dr. John Watson has recently become a widower. However, Lestrade comes into 221B Baker Street all flustered, and his coat is covered in dirt because he's just discovered that John Watson is dead. But how can he be dead? Like, he's in 221B Baker Street with the Master, or with Sherlock Holmes, as he's referred to in this story. And this all revolves around this woman who claims to be John Watson's wife. However, John Watson has no idea who this woman is, but she seems to recognize him. Let's play a clip from The Adventure of the Deceased Doctor, where this imposter wife meets John Watson and Sherlock Holmes for the first time.
John, why are you looking at me that way?
Because I am indeed John Watson, but you are not my wife.
How could you say such a thing?
Madam, I was married. Her name was Mary, and she is dead.
Explain yourself.
There's nothing to explain. This is the first time we have met.
She is also a nurse, and she and her husband enjoyed a brief but happy engagement, followed by an equally happy marriage. And it is your hands that give you away, madam.
My hands.
The dry skin indicates regular washing. More frequent than any housewife or scullery maid, and with a carbolic soap. But why would a nurse from Germany come to London, when nursing is a perfectly respectable and well-paid profession in your homeland? You must have left with some haste. A courtship that ended badly, perhaps? But why London? A friend? A relative?
My Aunt Hilda lives in Chelsea. She came here 5 years ago. But how did you know our engagement was brief?
The sheen of your wedding ring.
You really are Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
And to answer the question in the chat from Matteo Kunza, do you have to listen to the previous War Master stories to get this one, or can you listen to these without context and be fine? I can't speak for all of the War Master box sets, but for this one, you don't need any prior context. This is incredibly standalone. But he's also in the middle of a murder mystery investigation where numerous John Watsons are turning up dead, but they don't recognise these Watsons. There's literally, in this story, about 5 different baits and switches and rug pulls in The Adventures of the Deceased Doctor, that it's kind of impossible for me to spoil this story if I only mention 1 or 2 of them. There's just that much going on here, and Alfie Shaw's script is so multifaceted and so interested in delving into the meta aspect of a character like Sherlock Holmes, who has had so many numerous adaptations. You've, of course, have had the big ones in recent years, Elementary and Sherlock, and even Big Finish doing their own interpretation, where Sherlock Holmes is voiced and played by Nicholas Briggs in the audio medium. But the fact that Sherlock Holmes is such a broadly adaptable character and is so flexible, that's where the Adventures of the Deceased Doctor really finds its strength, playing with these different multiversal aspects of the Sherlock Holmes universe, including some sci-fi versions, but that might be a little bit of a reveal too far if I dive too deep into that particular plot strand. And when it comes to Moriarty, it's so interesting that you've got the War Master here as Sherlock Holmes facing off against the character that initially inspired the Master's creation, because when he was created by Barry Letts and Terrance Dicks in the early 1970s, he was going to be the Moriarty to the Doctor, the Third Doctor's Sherlock Holmes, and the fact that he's able to embody the Sherlock Holmes role to face off against a reborn Moriarty, because this takes place after the Reichenbach fall in this particular Sherlock Holmes continuity, it's so interesting to follow, and knowing in hindsight the directions the story goes in makes the first act even more interesting. It's very re-listenable, very, very re-listenable. It just keeps on giving as it goes along, until it culminates towards the end of the second act with a reveal so grim, so dark, that I am wondering, what is Alfie Shaw's problem? It is honestly the darkest thing that I have ever heard in a Doctor Who Big Finish story. The implication of what has happened to, like, how the Master is where he is, where is the original Sherlock Holmes, if he has indeed been replaced. Oh my god, what has happened? It's so mad. Citrus, now I'm intrigued. We're getting to spoilers. I can't know. The box set just got released today. I can't, nah. You couldn't pay me to do it. Honestly, at some point I will, I think, when I talk about here's the War Master as a character, and I'll just say, here's a thing he did to Sherlock Holmes one time. That's honestly the most I'll probably do in the near future. But yeah, The Adventure of the Deceased Doctor is one of the best Big Finish stories that I've listened to this year, which is already part of a box set which probably makes my top 5, definitely my top 10, maybe my top 5. So The Adventure of the Deceased Doctor by Alfie Shaw is such a wonderful listen. I enjoyed it and loved it, adored it from beginning to end, and I love how it played with the flexibility of the Sherlock Holmes character. It's also got a really interesting framing device where John Watson is writing the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, as is the framing device in the Arthur Conan Doyle books, but the direction it goes in at the end, for an ending, a few final lines which really, really sucker punch you. Really, really wonderful. It's not even the worst thing the War Master has done. It's not, no, but you don't expect it to happen in a story like this. I think it's the fact that it was just trundling along, like Christian Bale, like da-da-da-da, like this in the background. It just goes along like that for about 30, 40 minutes. And then all of a sudden, oh, here's what happened. And it's like, with Killing Time, what he did to Joe Grant and what he did to Nyssa in that box set, that's probably some of the worst things he's ever done. But you kind of see it coming, and you have that playful, manipulative relationship happening for the first, 30 minutes. And what I love about the War Master, by the way, that reminds me, what I love about this as well, is that the War Master knows full well that he's played by Derek Jacobi. Not literally, but he knows that he's played by, he knows that he has the appearance and the affect of a really friendly, heartwarming old man, and he uses that to his advantage. And he does that here in these box sets as well. Especially in The Master of Dorian Gray by David Llewellyn, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So yeah, with Killing Time, he's you're following it along and you're waiting for it to drop. But with The Adventure of the Deceased Doctor, I didn't expect the drop to happen when it did. It's so wonderful. What did he do to Jo? It broke her mind. It's really sad. It's really sad. Anyway, right, okay. So, let's wrap up the box set, though. So the fourth story, The Master of Dorian Gray by David Llewellyn, is of course based off of the story by Oscar Wilde, the Portrait of Dorian Gray, which is about a man, an affluent man in London who gets a painting commission, and as he becomes a more debaucherous and evil, villainous person, the portrait starts to reflect his soul. And it basically grants him immortal life as well. And no, there's not really a spoiler because it's in the plot description here. Seeking the power of immortality, the Master works himself into the life of Dorian Gray, but can he change how the story ends? I'll give the Master of Dorian Gray this, compared to the other stories, is that he's not just plomping and interrupting this mythology. In the Master of Dorian Gray, he's basically along for the ride with the book. For a good portion of it, he is just a brand new character in the Dorian Gray story. He calls himself Estrom. He's like the master of the house who works as the housekeeper for where Dorian Gray lives and sort of starts nudging him in the correct direction in order to follow the Oscar Wilde story, including going to a theatre production in order to see this woman who he's got an infatuation with, because Dorian Gray falls in love with this woman who's played by the same actress as Poetry in the other box set, Sybil Vane, once again played by Jesse Romero. So that's a nice little thematic link, Poetry and also Sybil Vane for the Dorian Gray. I don't know if that's an intentional through line, but I appreciate it nevertheless. The original painter of the Dorian Gray painting is Basil Hallward as well. He's in here as well, played by Edward Harrison. This also has a slight tenuous link to the Dorian Gray Big Finish stories. He's played by Alexander Vlahos, who is in those Big Finish stories, but as far as I'm aware, this is kind of unconnected. Do they have a crossover with the Dorian Gray Big Finish stories? I've not listened to any of that. It's the same actor, but I don't think it fits in. I don't know. They make no allusions to any other prior continuity. As long as you have a baseline understanding of the original book, then you'll be able to follow this one. You don't need to have any prerequisite. Kind of the same for Sherlock Holmes as well. But let's play a quick clip from The Master of Dorian Gray, where the Master is waiting for a play to start and for Dorian Gray to basically fall in love to continue the story. Let's play a clip.
It sounds to me the lad's quite taken with her.
Oh, believe me, he is. That's what concerns me. I am acutely aware of how adept actresses are at transforming themselves from moment to moment, on and off the stage.
Capricious, you mean? Well, yes. I remember the sort. Yeah, back when one was sowing one's wild oats, you understand.
Of course. Tell me, Lord Estrom, were you ever married? If that isn't too personal a question.
No, it isn't. And no, never married. At least not in this incarnation.
Reincarnation, old chap. I think you spent too long in the company of Hindus and Buddhists. Still, consider yourself spared. One should never marry if one can help it. Men marry because they're tired. Women because they're curious. Both are disappointed.
A tad cynical, don't you think?
Says the man who never married.
True. But perhaps experience is what the boy needs. If he believes love is what he feels, who are we to suggest otherwise? And who knows, perhaps this muse of his, this Sybil, is everything he claims.
In a theatre in the East End? I very much doubt that.
So it has the good production values, of course, from the rest of the box set stories, and Derek Jacobi's terrific. I also did really like the performance of Alexander Valahos as Dorian Gray. I can't compare it to his previous work, but he does a good job here. Unfortunately, though, I do think this does end the box set with a bit of a whimper. Honestly, I didn't really engage with it. It takes quite a long time to get going. It takes a long time for the Master to kind of ingrain himself into the plot in a meaningful way, which I think is kind of the point. He's sort of along for the ride for the first 2 acts or so before he decides to try and claim the power of immortality through the portrait. Unfortunately, though, it's just not that interesting, to be honest. Like, if you know anything about the original Dorian Gray story, then yeah, it's just a bit of an adaptation with that, except Derek Jacobi is just in it for a little bit. But then there's a few bit. If you don't know the story of Dorian Gray, however, you're gonna find the relationship between him and Sybil Vane really oddly done, because they don't really communicate the relationship that well, in my opinion. Like, obviously, it's a fairy tale for all intents and purposes, where they fall in love at first sight, and Sybil Vane is so enamored with love when she's on the stage that she gives a bad performance, and Dorian Gray's embarrassed, so decides to dump her. She then commits suicide in the story. Spoiler alert for like a 250-year-old story. Unfortunately, the Master of Dorian Gray, with a pretty cool third act, it does kind of bring the box set to a bit of a tepid close. What I will say, though, is that it's not bad enough for me to, like, say, you can ignore Escape from Reality. This is such a wonderful, terrific box set. Really, this is so good. As someone who was, like, I'm not sure if you can sort of sustain the range that much after 8 box sets, and there's only so many times when the War Master can just rip your heart out in the audio medium. Escape from Reality found an interesting way to do it with the format, by using these public domain characters, like, Greek mythology, Dorian Gray, Sherlock Holmes, etc., etc., and really playing with the format and really playing with the Master as a character, and using the tropes that we love this incarnation or loathe this version of the Master so much for, but finding a way to make it feel fresh and interesting, and giving a new sense of stakes to the proceedings, because these are fictional worlds, and he knows that he's in a fictional world, and he knows the ending of these stories, and he's able to steer them in the right direction. It's a terrific box set. It was after Self-Defense that I was thinking, maybe this range is running out of steam, even though that there was some really good stuff with him and the 10th Doctor in that story, but Escape from Reality has got me right back on board again. If they're able to make their upcoming box sets with the War Master feel as fresh and feel as vibrant as Escape from Reality, this range has still got legs for years to come. I really, really liked it. The War Master Escape from Reality is top tier Big Finish. It needs no prerequisite. I think you should listen to this thing immediately if you have the stomach for some of the directions that it goes in.